I got my license when I was 18, which is pretty much the earliest you can get your license. And I started buying real estate at a very early age. So for me, I don't know how I got this mindset, but I never had the mindset of a typical realtor or a typical salesperson where I'm just caring about the commission that I'm making on this one deal. I'm one of those types of real estate investors where I don't like to sell anything. I think a lot of people, they are trying to talk to all these wholesalers and do all this fancy mailer stuff and do all these things to find deals, where I think a strategy is also, hey, look at what's been sitting on the market for a certain amount of time. Big picture, this business is very difficult. And I think a lot of people, they get into it thinking it's easy, or they see stuff on TV, or they see XYZ person selling houses and it looks easy, but it is very difficult. But at the same time, it's my favorite business.
Welcome back to Real Estate Development Land to Legacy. I've got Matin Haghkar here with me, joining us from Philadelphia. We are going to continue talking about real estate development and provide information, content, lessons for the audience that could hopefully educate and provide cautionary tales and everything in between. Matin, welcome.
Thank you, Eugene.
So Matin, how did you get in real estate? What do you do? What keeps you busy?
Sure. So I own a full service real estate brokerage. I'm a broker owner. I've been in the business about 20 years. So we have a full service brokerage with over 50 realtors that work for us. We have a property management business that manages over 1,000 units. We have a mortgage business. We also have a construction and development company and some marketing at businesses and things like that as well. Like I said, I started 20 years ago. I got my license when I was 18, which is pretty much the earliest you can get your license. And I started buying real estate at a very early age. So that's kind of where we started, and that's where we are now.
What's your primary focus in real estate?
So pretty much all of the above. We have a lot of auxiliary businesses that we've set up that handles every single aspect of the business and every service. The brokerage is somewhat self-sustaining. The property management business is somewhat self-sustaining. Mortgage is somewhat self-sustaining. They really come to me if there's a big problem or a big issue, or if we're trying to do some big high-level decision-making, things like that. Get there, obviously, it didn't happen overnight. At the beginning, I was in the trenches every day. But right now, I have the luxury of more so focusing on what my passion is, which is more so the development side, construction side, buying and managing my own properties or managing them through our property management business. But really, we have the mindset of seizing any opportunity that comes on the table, and having these different businesses really helps that.
Great. So in my experience, I used to run a development and construction company. And what I found is that construction took way too much of my personal time, even though my passion was always on the development side. I love putting together the teams. I love going through the project design process, pushing it through permitting, as much as painful it is, but it was still enjoyable. But inevitably, construction took too much of my time. How do you handle that? How do you go about splitting your time and being effective?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and not to sound cliche, but having a good team is super important. And, being in this business so long, I've had to hire and fire so many people. We're in the position now where we have a really good team, and I don't need to micromanage people as much as I used to. With this team, we have full trust. They've been with us for a long time. They work through the ranks, and they really are at a level where I trust their decision-making almost as much as my own. I don't need to micromanage people. I don't have to stress about it, and I trust what they're doing. And that goes for property management, that goes with the brokerage and all of the above. And I think the same thing goes with real estate development. You build a team of subs that you can trust, aren't going to rip you off, are honest, do good work. You don't have to micromanage them. And then same thing with the design development phase. You have architects that you grow a relationship with, that you trust, engineers that you grow a relationship with. And I think having that good, reliable team is the most important thing to be able to scale your business and grow, because you can't do everything and you can't micromanage everything. It's too stressful. And, that unfortunately, there's no way to do it a magic potion or magic wand that you can find and, all of a sudden have an amazing team. It really takes a really long time to get there. And when we first started, it was just like me and my wife doing everything. And then, we slowly built up and got, when we hired some people that weren't a good fit, and then we, had to get rid of them, and we got new people that were good. It just takes time to grow that. And it takes a lot of grief and heartache over time. But eventually, if you hang in there I think you'll get that team ready to go.
Yeah, start with a good team. That's the most commonly heard advice, but somehow often misunderstood. How do you know when you have a good team? How do you know when you have good team players? What are your metrics? What is the process of deciding or evaluating?
Yeah. So, and, just being completely transparent about it, when you first start anything, and especially, I didn't start with a lot of money. We grew up very humble, didn't have a lot coming up. So when we first started, we didn't have a big business. We didn't have a lot of money. So we could only afford to hire, basic people that unfortunately maybe if we could afford it, we would have gotten better quality, but we couldn't because we couldn't afford it, or we had to do most of the work ourselves. As your business builds up, you kind of rotate through and those people churn themselves out eventually. They're not a good fit. They don't have the same ethos, whatever. But I think the biggest thing that, at least for me, is important is having the same mindset as the person that's the owner of the company, the head honcho, the decision maker, having that same mindset in all those managerial C-suite positions, if you will. So for me, I don't know how I got this mindset, but I never had the mindset of a typical realtor or a typical salesperson where I'm just caring about the commission that I'm making on this one deal. We've always had this bigger picture mindset where, hey, look, we want to do good. We want to do right by our clients. We want to do what's, follow the golden rule essentially, and treat others the way we want to be treated, and being honest with people where, hey, if it's not a good deal, we're going to tell you it's not a good deal. If it benefits me or I get a commission check or whatever, we're always going to be honest, and we might lose a deal here and there at first, but in the long run, you really build those strong business relationships that way. And that's how you get, instead of one deal, you get a client for life and many deals over the course of your lifetime. So I think that is really important, and making sure that all our managers, all our team has that mindset of not being desperate for one transaction or whatever. And one of the ways, I'll give you an example of property management, how we got there with that business is basically one of my favorite positions to be in business is to be the customer. I think the customer is the most powerful position in that big business org chart. And what I mean by that is essentially with our property management business, I position myself to be the biggest customer of our property management business. Even though we have hundreds of customers, I own the biggest chunk of the properties and I'm the biggest customer. So what does that do? What that does is our property management team and our directors and whatnot, they're never afraid to not have a job. God forbid if we lose every customer, just my properties alone will help sustain the property management business. So I think eliminating that desperation and fear from your employees where they are willing to say no to customers and say, hey, you're not a good fit for our business. You're maybe an unethical customer and we don't want to manage your properties. I think is very important because a lot of, unfortunately, people in the real estate business that are very desperate, they're living paycheck to paycheck, commission to commission. So they just take any business they can, whether the client is a good fit or good for them or has a good ethics or whatever. So for us, we're not afraid to say no to customers. We're not afraid to shut down business if we don't think it's a good fit for our ethos.
The development side, where does the project typically start for you? Do you start with developer's hat to figure out what applies, or do you wear your realtor hat by searching the property, or do you wear your contractor's hat, or all of the above, the process of starting on a new venture, on a new project?
Sure. So I think the thing and the hardest thing is finding a deal that makes sense. Construction prices are relative to where you are in the country or your market. But before COVID, I remember we would pay roughly $125 to $130 a square foot to build. It's around averaging $175 to build where we are per square foot. And obviously, if you build a large multifamily, it's different. If you build luxury, it's different, but that's roughly the average. So having that in mind, and then on top of that, the carrying costs and interest rates, it's gotten very, very difficult to find a deal that makes sense economically, considering the construction costs, considering the interest rates, carrying costs, all those things, insurance going up, taxes going up, all that stuff. So I think really analyzing the data of what's a good deal is the most important thing and figuring that out. So I would say first and foremost, finding a good deal, that's the hardest part. You identify a good deal, knowing what your construction is going to cost, knowing what you're allowed to build there based on the zoning, knowing what your carrying costs are going to be, knowing what your interest rate is going to be, all those different factors, and knowing all those complications is very important to make sure, hey, this deal is going to work. And then you negotiate the price, negotiate all the terms, you go under contract, you close. And then typically before we even close, we're slowly gearing up the team and starting the design development process. So finding our architects, we have a short list of people that we work with in different areas that we're very happy with, but coordinating with the architect, coordinating with the engineer. And then as soon as you close on the deal, that's when you want to start. It's hard because you also don't want to spend a bunch of money and write all these checks to architects and engineers and surveyors before you close, because God forbid the seller gets hit by a bus and you don't end up buying the property. So as soon as you close, you basically start writing your checks and getting everybody under contract for your architect, engineer, surveyor, all that. And depending on the size of your project, you may have to go to a planning commission if you're building up the development. For example, right now, we're building to get approved a 24-unit townhouse development. That from settlement to getting it shovel ready is probably a year-long process and probably going to be around $100,000 to $150,000 of soft cost for a design development, getting permits and engineering, geotech, soil report, survey, all that kind of stuff. So it is a long process, but if you're building a single townhouse or a single house, you can probably get it approved within 3 to 6 months if you don't need any variances. And then from there, it's approved. And either if you have a development business yourself, you get started with your subs, or if you have a GC, they get started. Typically, everything goes from there with the foundation, framing, utilities, all that stuff. And you slowly build it up from there. It also depends on where you are in the country as far as the variance process. That's a huge piece of this whole thing. A lot of people go after variances and they buy a property and they're like, oh, well, this township is easy. And I know this guy got this approved and I can get this approved. Instead of building a duplex, I'll get a variance and build a triplex. And that's how they base their whole economics of their deal on. And then after settlement, the commissioner gets changed and it's somebody else and he denies everybody. So you have to be really careful where you base the deal based on what you can do by right, not what you can do with your variance. And hopefully you get it, but that also adds a lot of time and money to the design development process.
Help me understand, going back to what you said in the beginning, the deal. When you evaluate the deal, what makes it good? Before you design the building or the development, before you go through all of those steps, you're just looking at a raw piece of land. How do you know if it's a good deal?
Sure. So I think most investors and developers, everybody's different. Everybody uses different metrics, but I would say you should probably bake in roughly 20% plus or minus profit. Some people do 15% or 10%. Some people do 30%. So you bake that in. If it's a low risk in a township where I know everybody that works there, maybe I'm willing to make 10%. So it's not a silver bullet answer, but I would say anywhere between that 15 to 25% range is what you want to bake into the cake that you're going to make. And of course, we both know you go in there doing all your math to the T. Oh, I'm going to make 20%. And then by the end of it, you're like, oh, I made 5% or 10% because of the carrying costs, or I didn't account for this, or the site development. I didn't know it was going to be that. And I think that's a big piece that a lot of investors lose their shirt, is the site development cost, because it's such a mystery until you do your geotech survey and all that kind of stuff. So I think the site development is something a lot of people need to pay attention to as far as like big development. But, we try to bake into the cake about 20% profit. And another angle to it is I'm one of those types of real estate investors where I don't like to sell anything. Even if I build, I like to hold on to as much as I can. Now, for example, this townhome development that we're working on right now, with that one, I probably will end up selling most of them, because let's say each townhouse sells for 550 to 600, the rents over there might only be 2,500. Well, I could take that 600, buy something else where I make 4,000 a month in rent. But it also depends on the area. If I think the area is, hey, it's not super market sensitive. If there's a crash, it's not going to go completely bust. Maybe I'll hold on to it. It still has a lot of room to appreciate. Or, hey, this is in a bit of a bubble area. I want to unload it, not have any risk. So I typically like to hold, because I think that's where you make the most in real estate, is when you hold long-term versus being quick in and out. I also love rentals for the long-term. That's, I think, a great business model, especially with all the tax havens and tax deductions you get from that. But really, it depends. Also, if you theoretically, and I'm not an accountant, but if you build 24 townhouses, let's just say, and you make $2 million. So on that $2 million, you're going to have to make capital gains on the money that you make. Now, instead of selling every single one, if you hold on to the last 4, then you didn't make 2 million. You just got to hold on to 4 houses, and you don't pay taxes necessarily on capital gains until you sell those houses. So there's a lot of angles to think about it. on that end. But like I said, I'm not an accountant, but that's typically the ethos there.
Tell me a little bit about describe a project that you did that went superbly well and what made it so good, what made you so proud of it.
I'll tell you one where we literally just finished it. This has happened to me many times where I'll buy a property and everybody after I buy it is like, oh my God, how did you get this like amazing deal and this amazing location, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, actually, it was sitting on the market for a year and nobody wanted it. And I've heard that so many times where I'll buy something and everybody like, oh my God, you got such a good deal. Or it's like, yeah, well, sitting there, nobody wanted it. And I think the optimal use of a property is so important. Where I bought a commercial storefront on one of the busiest streets in Philadelphia in Manayunk for $265. It was for sale for over a year and nobody wanted it in plain sight. After we bought it, we built 2 apartments on top. And it's in a really busy, high traffic location. So we're putting our office, our second location on the first floor. 2 apartments above, beautiful roof deck, beautiful views. We bought it for $265. It was a little complicated to build there. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There were some complications, but it's a small project, but I'm proud of it. Great location, area where I grew up. Basically, bought it for $265, maybe dumped 500,000 into it, and it's probably worth about 1.4, 1.5. So that's just one that we just wrapped up. Luckily, I think a lot of people, they are trying to talk to all these wholesalers and do all this fancy mailer stuff and do all these things to find deals, where I think a strategy is also, hey, look at what's been sitting on the market for a certain amount of time. You might be able to negotiate somebody down at the right opportunity because, it's just been sitting on the market. Big picture, we're kind of lucky where we're in this position where we're actually wrapping up a lot of our projects and basically finishing a lot of things off. And now we're in the design development phase of a couple different projects. This bigger townhome development is taking up some of our time, but that's like one of our good size one that we're working on. But there's a couple other little projects we're in design development. But I think right now I think it is a good time to go through that design development phase. And like we said, it takes maybe 4 months, 6 months, a year to do some of that. And you go through that process for a year now with this uncertainty, and fingers crossed, prices settle down in a year from now, or maybe there's a recession or whatever, God forbid. But it'll help with these construction costs where you're not in the eye of the storm right now trying to buy lumber or steel or whatever. I think being in that design development phase now and closing up some of your construction is a good position to be in right now.
I definitely want to talk a little bit more about the impact of potential impact on construction costs of the tariffs. But I want to go back to the example. The property was sitting on the market. How did you come across it? Did you just one day start looking for properties, or did you always know that it was available and you were watching it? Describe that period of time.
That's another beauty of, I think if you're a real estate developer and you also own a real estate brokerage and a property management business, you're always keeping your ear to the grindstone. You always know what's going on in the market. I have a bunch of my own realtors and other realtors constantly sending me deals where, hey, yeah, I'm a licensed broker, but I'll use somebody else as my agent if they bring me a good deal. So I constantly have people sending me deals, but for that one specifically, I actually found it on MLS myself. I have automatic searches set up on MLS. I have many automatic searches set up on MLS that I automatically get properties on. And yeah, for the normal person, it can be annoying getting like 10, 20 properties sent to you a day. But, I just click through, hey, no, yes, no, heart, favorites, whatever. My assistant would reach out, but it was on MLS and they had a really small real estate sign out there. They probably should have a bigger one, but it was on MLS and that's how I found it. It wasn't anything. I wish I could say it was something fancy, but it was simple and it was on the market. And with a lot of properties, once they sit there for a certain amount of time, I think we all know this, it gets a stench to it and then people become afraid of it, which I think is a very novice way to think. If you know your stuff, who cares if it's been sitting on the market for a year? Look into what you can do by right. Look at the optimal use. Look at do your own math and homework with what the return is, what the ARV is, all that stuff. And if you're an expert, you're not afraid of a property's been sitting on the market, which is silly to me. But to me, that's just a better opportunity to negotiate. But yeah, it was on MLS and that's how I came across it. And I bought many properties off MLS.
Well, so you saw it on MLS. You obviously knew the neighborhood because you grew up there. And what made you take a look at it, knowing that it's been sitting on the market for so long, and obviously others looked at it and passed on it? What made you think that you could do something with it?
Sure. So, I mean, as simple as, we looked at the zoning and we looked at what we could build there, and we did an estimate on the construction costs and what it would cost to build what we wanted and what the value would be after we built that. And to be fair, our estimate was like, it ended up being one or $200,000 more than what we had estimated. But luckily there was such a big buffer there where it didn't matter. And the reason that was the case was because this will check off your box of a good story and a horror story. The horror of it was basically when we bought it, initially I was thinking, hey, does it make sense to just knock the whole thing down or build on top? We both know building ground up is a lot easier, simpler, less headaches, less all that stuff versus rehabbing and building on top of an existing structure. So the reason we ended up actually building on top and not knocking it down was because the existing property was covering more of the land footprint than what the current zoning allowed. So we were grandfathered with the footprint. We had a little bit extra square footage. It was only like maybe 50 feet by 40 feet was the lot size. So nothing big. It was basically a square. But that's typical in that area. We thought, hey, look, this building covers almost the entire lot. So let's just build on top. And then by doing that, it ended up causing a giant structural, like, we had to over design it to the point where you could land like Air Force One on top of it. It's super sturdy now, structural steel, giant foot. We had to dig out the basement, put giant footings all the way around. That structural element of it added like $100,000 to the project that we weren't accounting for. And hindsight, it's like, well, was it worth the $100,000 to have this 100 extra square foot? Probably not. It would have cost a lot less, actually. Probably would have cost us like maybe $150,000, $200,000 less if we would have knocked it down. But you live and learn. And that kind of stuff is hard to figure out in the heat of the moment. And then you get farther down the hole. And it's like, okay, by the time we figured it out, we already paid the engineer, we already paid the architect, we already paid this guy, we already paid that guy, we already got our permits. And it's like, hey, do we undo all that, set ourselves back another year to get approved to knock it down and build ground up? But it ended up working out. Like I said, we had enough margin where it wasn't the end of the world, but we did take a little bit of a wash on that cost.
Right. Yeah. It's always the challenge when you end up spending a ton of money on figuring out a solution to later realize that all of that could have been avoided. What lesson do you think you learned from that, and how would you avoid that? Do you consider it a mistake?
It's tough because it only makes sense in reverse. So it's hard to say. And I think you just have to, in the big grand scheme of things, I think a good analogy is if you own one rental and that rental's empty, you're stressed. But if you own 10 rentals and 2 or 3 of them are empty, you're not as stressed, right? So I think because we do a lot of volume and we, try to like go hard and fast, it's like, oh, yeah, we learned something, but on to the next one. We try not to dwell on it, learn our lesson, whatever. The price per square foot in 10 years could be so much more that, hey, who cares if we spend another $150,000 for 100, 200 square feet? So it's hard to say. And we did end up getting a slightly better layout and that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't say it was like a complete loss, but to be transparent, if I could go backwards, I probably would have rather knocked it down and built ground up. But I don't think in the long term, it's going to be that huge of a loss. It'll kind of balance itself out. Another thing is I wasn't too happy with the architect we were using and some other subs. And I think they could have advised us better, and the structural engineer. So you live and learn and you hire and fire, but yeah, that's the end of the game.
Right. It's funny because I used to run a construction company for a very long time. And the reason I started a construction company was because I wanted to capture that margin. I was like, I pay these guys whatever margin they're making, could be 10, 15% on smaller projects, could be 3 to 5% on huge commercial projects. What I didn't understand at the time is how much extra risk I'm taking on and how easy it is for a contractor to lose that 5% margin if something goes wrong. And so we ended up shutting it down, and I want to focus on development. I don't mind having my GC make the profit. I want them to make the profit, but I would rather work with somebody who has built multiple projects, who have established teams, and let them take care of it. In your case, you have your own construction company. I presume that when you're looking at a new project, you probably call your construction PM and say, hey, I've got this project. What do you think? And I would imagine you have them give you feedback on construction costs, right? How do you find that process?
Sure. So, and I think with the construction business, because I fully agree with you, and you can only do so much. And I think some people, they try to do everything at once and it never works out well. A quote that comes to mind is like Bruce Lee. He said, fear not the man that has practiced 1,000 kicks, fear the man that's practiced one kick 1,000 times. So I think becoming a specialist in one thing is so important in business that people lose. And it's like, hey, you have a whole lifetime ahead of you, right? Maybe spend 10 years on perfecting this business, then 10 years on perfecting this one, then 10 years on perfecting that one. Don't try to do everything at once. And I think for us, I always used GCs and general contractors and hired developers and construction companies myself, but I didn't start our own development business until we had a large volume of development. And you could say the same thing about property management. Well, if you're only managing one property or two properties, maybe it makes sense to hire another sub and give your property to somebody else to manage. But if you get an opportunity or you buy a 100 unit apartment building, well, maybe now it makes sense to start your own property management business. And it's the same thing with development, where if you're doing one or two here and there, you should hire a GC, you should hire a developer, all that. But you could also argue, well, if you're just doing one project, you have all the time to GC it yourself, which if you do, great. But I never had that luxury to be able to do that. I was always really busy with work, business, whatever, to be able to just manage the construction process. Because I think people underestimate how much is involved in it. There's so many subs to manage. And then each sub has to work together carefully. You have to make sure they're following the code, the plans, whatever. And they're on top of that, each sub has a whole web of employees that we both know what contractors are like. There's good ones and bad ones, and a lot of them have, God forbid, drug problems or whatever, unfortunately, and it is what it is. So focus on what you're good at is so important. Develop that. And then eventually, if you get an opportunity that comes in that's like, hey, I just got a giant development project of 20 units, 50 units, 100 units, whatever, then maybe it does make sense to start your own construction company, because you can also hire the best of the best and pay them a salary maybe. Versus if you're just doing one project, you can't hire the best of the best and you can't pay them a salary. With that bigger project, you can afford to do that. So I think it really depends on where you are with the opportunities you have and where you are with your own client list and project list, if it makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. I think it's good advice to get good at one thing before expanding and taking on too many things. Unfortunately, I know too many people that jump into multiple ventures at the same time, and it just becomes complicated and it becomes a source of multiple mistakes. And especially in development and construction, one little thing could easily snowball. One little inspection fail during construction would delay your next trade, would then delay your following trades. And if one person missed one little thing, you could lose a couple of months of time, which would trigger multiple different things. We started talking about construction costs and effects of the tariffs. I'm curious what you were seeing. I'm asking this question because obviously it is an interesting one. There's a lot of products that are being imported from various countries. What is the percentage of construction materials that are actually being imported from various countries, and specifically from China? What's your experience? What are you finding?
Sure. So and again, I think it's one of those things where if you're looking for it, you'll find it. And it's like, show me the charts, I'll show you the news kind of mentality, where it's really hard to say because there's so many angles to it where, okay, I haven't noticed dramatically like lumber going up or steel going up or this or that. But I will tell you what I've been doing, for example, is like I stockpiled early on like all my appliances. They're all my appliances and fixtures, like plumbing fixtures, ceiling fans, light fixtures, stoves, grills, like refrigerators, dishwashers. Like we bought all that stuff up right away. And I do notice some of them I'm getting emails saying, hey, this is now on back order, or this isn't available anymore, or this or that, or whatever. So again, it's hard to say, is that just like normal market or is that because of the tariffs? It's hard to say, but from what I see, at least on the business media that I follow, it does seem like a lot of consumers are doing the same thing. They're trying to front run all their purchases. So in fear of prices going up. But like I said, on lumber, on steel, on aluminum, carbon fiber, flooring, whatever, I haven't noticed a dramatic increase. Now, at the same time, I think in construction, something important to also monitor is the price of oil. Price of oil is not that high. It's like 60, maybe $3 or $4 a barrel right now. So, that's something to monitor too, where if that gets low, that will help balance and taper it a little bit. And then bigger picture, it's like, okay, well, are we going to have drill baby drill in America and get more oil? Are we going to have more lumber coming online in America because they're going to do that? Are they going to, reduce regulations and what's going on there? So I think it's really hard to predict where it's going to go. But I think I think in my mind, it did make sense to buy my fixtures and appliances and the easy things right away for what I needed on some of my projects where, hey, maybe I could have waited a few months, but I was a little worried like, hey, maybe the shelves will be there or prices will go up. It makes sense to get them now But like I said, I haven't noticed a dramatic increase on a lot of other things. And bigger picture, like I said, we're wrapping up a lot of our construction projects. That's why we need appliances now. A lot of our stuff, we're kind of getting to the end of it. Hopefully, I won't need to buy more materials like lumber and steel until later on. So we'll win flooring, but we'll see.
Right. Yeah. And I'm being as apolitical about it as possible. But obviously, we're in the same boat right now. We're trying to analyze a new project, analyze the costs. And I'm talking to contractors, I'm talking to some suppliers, and everybody's like, look, we can tell you what it costs now. We have no idea how much it's going to cost tomorrow. And so, how do you make decisions about it? How do you go about designing a new project without really having a good grasp of what it's going to cost you? Because we still don't know what the effect of the interest rates is going to be in the next couple of years. It is possible that construction costs go up and then we see a massive recession and people stop buying real estate. That would be a huge risk. And I'm seeing a lot of private equity right now is kind of sitting on sidelines waiting to see what happens. What's your advice or what are you doing to mitigate that?
Sure. There's obviously a lot to consider. Maybe you bump up your margins a little bit, where typically you make 20% on a project. Maybe you bump that to 30% to have a little buffer in the risk. Bigger picture, you're probably gonna get some flack in the comments for me saying this, but most people don't mind having a recession come on. And I think the biggest pain from a recession is people losing their jobs. That's the worst and has a dramatic effect on people's lives. And the stock market goes down. I think it's something like the top 10% own 80% of the market, and the other like 40% own the other 10%, and the other 50% of the population is in debt. They don't own the stock market. So they don't care if the stock market goes down. But only the kind of top cares about the stock market. Unemployment, that's terrible, but it's really the only way for prices to go down. And when they talk about inflation, it's like, hey, that's the rate that's going up. It's not it flattening. It's not it going down. The only way you have prices go down is a recession or depression. So I think that ripping that Band-Aid off and having that little bit of pain would solve a lot of these problems. I've been in the business about 20 years, a little more. So I went through the financial crisis, all that stuff. And I think there's a lot of lessons there that you can interpret to now where, I think it really depends on your market, right? Real estate is a very market geographic thing. So for us, for example, we're lucky we're in a great market where we still have tight inventory in our market. So we still have, I want to say like existing homes are maybe 3 to 4 months of supply, and a normal healthy market is 5 to 6 months of supply, but new construction is like 9 months of supply. So the supply for new construction is high. When all that comes online, yeah, maybe it'll become a stable market again. But where we are, the average home price is pretty much close to the national average. I want to say the national average is about 450 to 470 last I checked. And the average where we're located is about 450 to 470. So when it does crash, if it crashes and when it does, and same thing in the last recession and, financial crisis, those markets that were closer tied to the national average didn't experience a huge dip. They might have stayed flat for a year or two, or they might have gone down 5% or whatever. It wasn't anything crazy. But the markets where they're double the national average, triple the national average, those markets experience 20, 30, 40% dips. Yes. And you're kind of seeing it now. California is kind of starting to show some declines. Florida is starting to show some declines. Idaho is starting to show some declines. Basically, Texas, the places that they've gotten a little too far from the national average. So I would really keep that in mind in the market you're in and look at the national average and look at where your market sits. Now, here's the thing too. There's a lot of other factors there. It's not just the national average. Like if you're in a market where, let's say you're in a market where you're double the national average, but you have the best economy there, you have the highest paying jobs, you have amazing infrastructure, international airport down the street, you have a beach, you have public transportation, you have no crime, you have the best school district, you have the best colleges, you have the best grocery stores, whatever. Maybe that justifies you being higher. But if you don't have all that stuff and you have high crime and this and that, and it's just a trend that it shot through the roof, then you should be a little more concerned and cautious.
Makes sense. And real estate is always local, right? You can't apply national averages to your specific region, but you always have to consider your local variables and make decisions based on that. It is going to be interesting to see what happens. I recently published an article and I got a lot of heat for it because the headline was "Tariffs are great." And then people started talking and it turned into a political discussion. But my point was similar to what you were saying, that with the effect of tariffs, even though personally I'm against tariffs, I've always been for free market, free trade. But I think what is important is that we are going to see some constraints we are going to be seeing reduction in government spendings. And with that, it is likely going to trigger a slowdown, and it is likely going to trigger a recession, which is, we are going to see unemployment. We are going to see large corporations reduce their spendings. So all of that will contract GDP. And as a result, then we should be able to, or the Fed is likely to react with reduced interest rates to stimulate the economy again. And hopefully we can see more construction becoming affordable, and the economy will find a new equilibrium. We'll see what happens. My commentary again was more apolitical and just trying to figure out how to navigate the forces that we cannot influence. We can only react to them, and it makes no sense, doesn't help anybody to get angry about it. We need to see what's happening in the market and react to it so that we could continue growing our businesses.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes and the reasoning for things? Very smart. They know what they're doing. They know more than me and you about what's going on under the hood. So you hope there's a rhyme or reason to it. I think I am actually in favor of the tariffs to a certain degree because, and I don't want to get political about it or go down the rabbit hole, but if you look at when the tariffs started and how it happened during World War II, it was kind of like, hey, look, America's the last country standing. It was like nation building. So they gave all these countries good deals on tariffs, and they're still carrying them on now. And it doesn't seem fair. We're exporting and we're basically getting, they say ripped off, but it kind of is like that where, hey, if we're sending, cars over there and let's say a Ford Explorer in Europe costs $200,000, but you can sell a BMW here for $50,000. Well, that doesn't seem fair. I kind of understand where they're coming from there. But again, I'm not an economist. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and I assume the people in there are a lot smarter than me. But I think one could argue that maybe it would have made sense to eliminate some of the regulations, drill, baby, drill, get the lumber online, get everything set up here, get the chips here, do everything here, and then do the tariffs after you have everything set up here where it's not affecting the market and disrupting things as much. Realistically, I don't see when iPhones are going to start being made here by Susie Joe down the street, putting them together, right? Hard to picture that as well. So it's hard to say, but it's very difficult to look at it from so many angles, if you will. But I kind of do support the tariffs, but I don't know if I necessarily agree with the fashion they were implemented in and the order of things. But again, I trust that hopefully these guys are a lot smarter than us.
Yeah, I'm sure there are thousands of different opinions, and the media is not helping us by over-exaggerating the most vocal or the most aggressive opinions out there. So it's always hard to filter through the noise to actually figure out, to make a decision for yourself. What else should we be talking about? What else would you like to cover that would be important for you that you're passionate about?
Sure, there's so much there. Big picture, this business is very difficult. And I think a lot of people, they get into it thinking it's easy, or they see stuff on TV, or they see XYZ person selling houses and it looks easy, but it is very difficult. But at the same time, it's my favorite business. You get what you put into it. It definitely is the case where if you work hard, most people that work hard, they're successful at it, but it is a grind. The barrier to entry in the real estate business was a little higher. Anybody can go get a license. It's so easy. You just put in a few hours into class, you take a test, you can take the test as many times as you want. There are no requirements. And as long as you have a pulse and you're over 18, you can get your license. So because of that, I think the market's a little saturated with realtors. What happens is usually like as real estate prices go up, the number of realtors goes up. And as real estate prices go down, people turn in their licenses. It is a tough business. So I would say if you really have a passion for it and you get into it, hang in there and work hard, but it will take a lot of time. And it is difficult for a lot of people to get started and do it that don't have a nest egg or don't have rich parents or a referral network or whatever. It can be challenging and difficult and definitely soul sucking, if you will. But I think if you hang in there, you'll do well. But if you work hard, you'll be successful.
Matin, thank you very much. Pleasure speaking to you. And tell us for the record, how does one get a hold of you? What's the best way to find you?
Sure. So our website is plusrealtors.com. That's our real estate brokerage. And then our property management business is plusmanagers.com. And our mortgage business is wisemortgage.com. And you can find us on all social media, Facebook, Instagram. We have a YouTube account, Twitter, X. So yeah, hopefully we see you guys there and reach out anytime.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks.